This hour on i24 News, Special Counsel Robert Mueller gives hours of testimony to 2 congressional committees, but the question is, did we learn anything new? In Asia, a chilling warning from Beijing to those pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong. The Chinese government says sending in troops to stop the demonstrations would be justified. In the Middle East, Israel says it's broken up an elaborate attempt by Iran to recruit spies and militants inside the Palestinian territories and in Israel. And as Boris Johnson officially becomes Prime Minister of Great Britain, it looks like Iran is making an offer to resolve a tanker dispute peacefully.
From the i24 News studios in Times Square in New York, this is Clearcut with Michelle McCory.
Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Michelle Devone in for Michelle McCory. The political focus in the U.S. today was squarely on Special Counsel Robert Mueller's testimony before 2 congressional committees. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler kicked off the first hearing by asking Mueller to clarify a key boast made by President Trump. Take a listen.
So the report did not conclude that he did not commit obstruction of justice. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And what about total exoneration? Did you actually totally exonerate the president?
No.
Now, in fact, your report expressly states that it does not exonerate the president.
It does.
And your investigation actually found, quote, multiple acts by the president that were capable of exerting undue influence over law enforcement investigations, including the Russian interference and obstruction investigations. Is that correct?
Correct.
We'll hear more from Mueller's testimony in just a moment, but many Republicans and Democrats alike spent much of the day critiquing Mueller's delivery, his demeanor, as much as what he actually said. One Republican congressman noted that Mueller did not seem to take on a persuasive tone.
I found Director Mueller intellectually disheveled, frequently confused, and highly evasive on basic questions about the activities of Russians and their commingling of interests with people associated with Democrats and the anti-Trump movement.
All right, let's go to our senior national correspondent, Michael Shore, who's been covering this story all day on Capitol Hill and still there. Hi, Michael. So was there anything new presented today?
Well, you know, the Democrats would have you think that they didn't want to present anything new, that they wanted to go through this and give their take on this report, a take that they don't think that the American people had yet gotten, that Donald Trump had sort of, and William Barr, his Attorney General, had sort of taken all of control of the spin of what the Mueller report was. Democrats weren't necessarily about something new, but what they were able to do is they were able to get from the very beginning of the hearings, when Gerald Nadler, the New York Democrat and chairman of the Judiciary Committee, was able to ask right away. The president, he said, always talks about how this report exonerated him on obstruction of justice. Mr. Mueller, did it exonerate him? And he said no. And so from the very get-go, that's what the Democrats wanted to do. They wanted to seemingly wanted to prove the point on obstruction of justice. After the hearings were over and people had a chance to digest what was said, I spoke with a number of members of Congress, 2 from Tennessee, ironically, and both of them are on the Judiciary Committee. Steve Cohen and Mike Johnson, one a Democrat, one a Republican, with very different takes, Michelle, on what went on today in the Judiciary Committee.
But it was clear the president had not behaved in a manner that was appropriate, that he, if he was not president and there wasn't a Justice Department policy of not indicting a sitting president, that his conduct would have amounted to obstruction of justice and he would have been indicted. And that he did, and his campaign did, actively seek out and hope and relish in Russian interference in our election.
Well, look, the standard that he was using is unprecedented, as I pointed out in my closing statement on the Republican side, that never before, except for the Donald Trump example, has a special prosecutor been called to exonerate someone for failing to prove their innocence, and that's effectively what happened here. So everything that happened beyond that point in the hearing was Mr. Mueller pointing to the report, saying over and over that it says what it says. That's what he indicated he would do today, and that's what he did. So I think not much comes of this.
no bias to the South. I know there are many different states there. They're not both from Tennessee. One, Michelle, Steve Cohen from Tennessee, and Mike Johnson is from Louisiana. My mistake there, corrected well in the control room. But I do think that what you saw, by example, those two members of Congress coming out and saying exactly what was being shared by other members of their caucuses and within the Judiciary Committee itself. You look at this and you know the Democrats really wanted to present and maybe push forward impeachment, and the Republicans wanted to impugn Robert Mueller and his report, how he got to his findings, and the kind of people that he brought in to help him there. And I think to some extent both got where they were going. I don't know if you know baseball well. This was more of a pitcher's duel than it was a slugfest. Michelle?
Sure, you're saying both got what they wanted, where they were going. Maybe everyone read into it what they wanted to. Trump not being exonerated, that's a headline we've been seeing all across media outlets. Would you say that the Democrats do have enough or more in order to push for an impeachment at this point?
Well, it's that, of course, not up to me. But if you speak to Democrats in the hall, including Lori Trahan, who a Democrat, a freshman member of Congress from Massachusetts, she said that this convinced her. She was not for impeachment until today. She said after watching Robert Mueller, now she wants to have an impeachment inquiry. So these little things do matter in terms of what the Democrats want to do. There's a 6-week break coming up for members of Congress. They go back to their constituents. They speak to their voters. And by and large, and I've seen a lot of these voters across the country as I've covered the election, many of them on the Democratic side want the House to push forward with impeachment, and I think that this is what they got out of it today. The Democrats now, every single one that I spoke to today said they're pushing that in that direction. Michelle?
Michael, sure, thanks so much for this. All right, let's debate all that we have now with our opening panel. Joining us is constitutional law attorney Jenna Ellis-Reeves and former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney Randy Zellin. Thanks for joining me. All right, we're going to start. Michelle. Hi, we're going to start with you, Randy. So, do you think there was anything new in today's hearings?
No. And I could stop there the same way I would respectfully submit that when Representative Nadler asked the question, did your findings exonerate the president? Answer, no. I would have sat down at that point. I think what we did learn today that perhaps the smartest person in the room was the president, who said that today's proceedings were an embarrassment, because they were an embarrassment. This was not about getting to the truth. This was not about doing what's best for the country. This was all about one side saying you're bad, the other side saying no, you're bad. And this is not what this country is supposed to stand for. So quite frankly, for me, we learned nothing more than perhaps either Mr. Mueller is smarter than all of us with the little cat and mouse, or maybe he's a little bit past his prime.
All right, Jenna, do you agree with this? Do you think that nothing new, and if anything, this was an embarrassment?
I actually totally agree. And I think we didn't learn anything more than we've known with the 448-page report that has been, open to the public since April. And this was really just kabuki theater. I mean, this is the Democrats wanting to push and drive this narrative so that they could possibly have something to impeach President Trump for, because they know that they're not going to win in 2020. And so they're driving this narrative. And so we didn't learn anything. But I think that the biggest takeaway, Michelle, is that this is a prime example why the court of public opinion is so different from a genuine court of law. And this is why we have due process in this country. This is why there are standards. This is why we don't use words like exoneration in a court of law. We use words like, and terms like guilty or not guilty. And when someone has not even been charged, then the attorney general or any of his subordinates, including the special counsel, cannot legally exonerate someone. So we need to focus on the legal questions here, which have been asked and answered since April, and not focus on the circus, which is simply the political back and forth that is not doing any of this country any good whatsoever. We need to put this to bed and stop talking about the Mueller report. It's done and over.
All right, we'll be talking about that in just a moment, so stick with us. We do have more to discuss, including President Trump's reaction to the hearing today. And also coming up, Israel says it's broken up an attempt by Iran to recruit spies and militants in the Palestinian territories and inside Israel. We'll have the latest. Also in the Iranian front, Tehran makes an offer to resolve its tanker dispute with Great Britain, but will the new British Prime Minister take the offer? And new and very serious threats from China made against the Hong Kong protests. Welcome back to Clearcut. I'm Michelle Devone in for Michelle McCory tonight. Once again, our top story is the Robert Mueller hearings on Capitol Hill today. And the debate rages on whether Mueller added anything new to the Russian election meddling story. But President Trump is left with no doubt about how it went.
Former special counsel Robert Mueller taking the stand in powerful back-to-back hearings, answering questions about his 22-month-long investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election and the Trump campaign.
It was in the public interest for our investigation to be complete, but not to last a day longer than was necessary.
Mueller setting the stage from the start, outlining the bottom-line findings of his report and making it clear that he would not go beyond that.
And what about total exoneration? Did you actually totally exonerate the president?
No.
And for much of the questioning, responded with short, often yes and no answers. Meanwhile, Republicans took aim at Mueller's reputation.
It was not the special counsel's job to conclusively determine Donald Trump's innocence or to exonerate him.
GOP members also launching an attack on his team and questioning the origins of his investigation. And while Mueller remained tight-lipped on how it began, he didn't have an issue reiterating his concern about Russian election interference.
That aspect of our investigation that has and would have long-term damage to the United States.
Mueller criticizing the president for encouraging WikiLeaks to publish Clinton emails stolen by Russia.
Problematic is an understatement in terms of what it displays in terms of giving some, hope or some boost to what is and should be illegal activity.
All right, let's get back to our panel now. Constitutional law attorney Jenna Ellis-Reeves and former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney Randy Zelling. Randy, I want to start with you. Trump, first of all, is calling this a total victory. Not sure about that. Democrats are definitely using the fact that he wasn't exonerated against him. But I want to ask you, what do you think should have been asked today and what could have changed the picture of what I asked earlier? Was there anything new? What could have made something new?
Well, let's work backwards. We did learn something new. The meme of the century will now be, I take your question. That's it. But in all seriousness, to me, there should have been perhaps 4 questions. That takes about 4 minutes. I would have asked the question, once it's been established that the evidence did not exonerate him. Question 1, what evidence did you look at to determine that you could not exonerate the president? Then I would have simply said, if there were no policy that you can't indict a sitting president, what evidence would you have looked at to determine whether or not you could indict the president?
Though we did say later on that that was not the only reason.
But I would have said, if there were no such policy, what evidence would you have looked for to see and determine whether or not you could have charged the president and indicted him? And simply said, did you have that evidence in your possession and just not look at it because you had already determined you couldn't indict him anyway? And I would have sat down.
And it would have ended much sooner. Jenna, do you think this was a victory for President Trump as he claims it was?
I do, because nothing changed, and we knew that nothing would change from a legal perspective. And so the only thing at stake is the political circus, right, in the court of public opinion. And I think that everyone understood that Mueller didn't really say anything new. It was very apparent that the Democrats were showboating. I mean, I agree with Randy that they should have sat down much sooner. This congressional hearing honestly shouldn't have even taken place. They could have showboated without Mueller even being there. I mean, he was practically useless to the hearings anyway. And so the American people are really tired of just pushing this narrative when we know that from a legal basis, nothing is coming out of this that is going to in any way hurt President Trump because he didn't do anything. And that is the legal conclusion of the report and of the Attorney General's comments after. And so I think that, President Trump absolutely won the political victory here, but the legal victory was already won at the conclusion of the investigation. And that's what remains important here. And if the Democrats continue to push this whole impeachment narrative, they just have even more political ground to lose.
So very quickly, Jenna, what do you think should happen next?
Well, I think that we're waiting for the Inspector General's report, and we have to remember that the Attorney General, Bill Barr, is required by interest of justice as the prosecutor to look and see what potential crimes were committed on the Democrat side. He is going to look at the origin of the Steele dossier, the probe, the Russia investigation, Comey potentially having a spy in the White House. All of this is coming out. It's not going to look good for Democrats. We're waiting on that.
All right, we have 20 seconds, but what do you think will happen next? What should happen?
What should happen? We should get back to dealing with important things like climate control, like people living in the street, like people not having health insurance, like people not having a job, boosting the morale of this country, making it proud and making us proud once again to be American citizens. And the people who want to come here, show them that there really is a reason why you do want to be here.
All
so
right.
make America great again.
Thank you very much
That's what we're
to
doing.
both of you. Thank you, Jen Ellis-Reeves and Randy Zellen. In other news tonight, North Korea has test-fired at least 2 missiles just in the last 2 hours. And right now, it appears the missiles are short-range projectiles that would not violate North Korea's promise to refrain from long-range tests. We'll keep you updated on this story as it develops. And in Israel, an elaborate Iranian spy network has been uncovered by the Shin Bet security service. The network apparently operated out of Syria using a series of fake profiles on Facebook and on other social media sites as well. i24 News correspondent Yoav Borovitz has the report.
Well, Israel's domestic security intelligence agency, the Shin Bet, has today announced the uncovering of an Iranian terror network, which sought to recruit agents in Israel, as well as the Palestinian Authority, through social media. Now, according to the agency, the Iranian-backed network operated out of Syria, led by Syrian organization Abu Jihad, in attempting to recruit agents by initially contacting them via fake Facebook profiles that they created. It says that those contacted were asked to gather data on sites such as military bases and police stations with a view to providing Iran with potential Israeli targets. The Shin Bet claims that the Iranian attempts over the last 3 months were unsuccessful. Obviously, this is a major story which comes to show us how Iran tries to operate inside Israel and the Palestinian Authority, basically attempting to enhance terror and destabilize Israel and ripping the publicity glory, quote-unquote, from such attempts. It also comes to show how strong can the Syrian-Iranian connection be, as the two countries not only sharing military know-how and resources in Syria, but also trying to export it to other places. But eventually, at least for now, Israel foiled this terror plot, which also comes to show us how proficient and diligent Israeli intelligence organizations are. I'm sure we will learn more about this attempted operation in the following days. It will sure be interesting to follow. And who knows, maybe Iran will continue to try wreaking havoc here in Israel as the Syrian front gets more heated and dangerous.
And staying on the Iran front, the regime in Tehran is hinting that it is now open to a tanker swap with Britain. This doesn't come as a surprise to many, and Iran's seizure of the Stena Impero tanker has been seen as a tit-for-tat move. That's after British authorities detained an Iranian tanker earlier this month on suspicion it was illegally shipping oil into Syria. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani said today that the country would look to release the tanker if Britain reverses its, quote, incorrect act that they have done. Obviously talking about the seizure of the tanker. So far, there's been no formal response from the UK. So let's talk about the latest news now from Iran with Jonathan Tobin. Jonathan is the editor-in-chief of the Jewish News Service, and with us on set, we have Middle East analyst Thane Rosenbaum. Thank you for joining us. Jonathan, we'll start with you. Iran initially claimed the oil tanker was violating their waters. Now it's unquestionable that was a tit-for-tat move. What do you think that Britain is going to do at this point?
Well, I think Britain will do its best to get its ship released, its tanker released. And I think this needs to be seen in the context of Iran's broader strategy towards the United States' efforts to force it to renegotiate the nuclear deal that President Obama concluded 4 years ago. All of this, all of its provocations, its shooting down of a drone, it's all aimed at sort of amplifying this sort of war scare, trying to bluff its way out of a very difficult situation because the sanctions that have been imposed by the United States and which the Europeans are, despite their bravado, helpless to get around. They are working. They're starving the Iranians as much as they are, as Israel's just revealed, trying to ramp up its terrorist activities, its spying activities. They're running out of money, and they're in a crisis about that. So they're trying to, as I said, bluff their way out of it. But I think the thing that's not in the headlines today, but which reports are emanating from around the world, that Iran is seeking a back channel to the United States. That despite its tough talk, it's going to negotiate with the United States. Trump's policies, despite the criticisms that he has earned from Democrats and others who wanted to stick with the nuclear deal, they are forcing Iran to take acts that are reckless and also aimed ultimately at another negotiation. There's no way around it.
So it's very interesting. You see this as a desperate act, and also you think it's a back channel to talk with the United States again. This is a surprising thing. What do you think about this?
Well, I agree with Jonathan, but I think it's more than just the Iran deal and the attempts to pick up a back channel to renegotiate the deal. I think this plays very well in Iran. Remember, this is a British, United Kingdom oil tanker. Remember, it was a few months ago where the fast boats Iranians sabotaged two attached mining explosives to two other tankers. Seemed like a very similar act of sabotage. The difference was they didn't acknowledge it. They didn't take credit for it. It required a video to show that it was them. But now they're telling the world, they're telling their own people, look what we've done. Remember, the UK was once a colonial power, an occupying power in Iran. So this plays much better among the cheap seats.
So then you think this bullying behavior is going to work for them?
I think that it works internally. Remember, they're a mess. You know, their economy is crippled. As Jonathan said, the sanctions have absolutely worked. And this seems to me a little like what we see with Gaza. The crippling sanctions, the lack of funding, the desperate economic situation. Let's fire a few rockets. Fire a few rockets, the people will see that we have some power. And this seems to me one attempt that the Iranians are not even concealing it, right? They had this incredible image of them raveling down from the helicopters. Look what we did. We took over a tanker of a major world power. I think this plays differently. I think this is something that they needed. This is the kind of thing that we see very often in the Middle East as a response to internal weaknesses. Give the people something to feel that we are back in the world and we are strong again.
Sure, this is Middle East play, but definitely not European play. Jonathan, how do you think Britain will react to this, and how can they regain their deterrence after this kind of behavior?
Well, the problem for both Britain and other European powers is that they have no deterrence. Only the United States can really give them some deterrence. They're between a rock and a hard place, and a bit like the Iranians, in that most of the European nations want the Iran nuclear deal to continue. They can't get around American sanctions, and so they feel it's unfair. They're paying the price. They're the ones whom the Iranians are trying to bully. But in the end, new Prime Minister Boris Johnson, as well as the rest of the European powers, they're going to have to go along with the United States. They will certainly negotiate to get their crew and their tanker back. Iran won't hold it indefinitely. Iran knows that it can only go so far in these provocations. It doesn't want a war any more than anybody else does, because they stand to lose more than anyone else. What they are trying to do is to try and sound tough, even as they are about to retreat. I don't think there's much doubt that sooner or later, since Trump is not being intimidated, he's not been bluffed by the war or panic
we'll have
talk
to
that
definitely
the mainstream media in the United States has done.
We'll have to see definitely if
so,
others join
therefore,
the U.S. We're just about to finish. We don't have time. Thank you to both of you so much. We'll be back after the break.
You're watching Clearcut with Michelle McCory on i24NEWS.
Welcome back to Clearcut. I'm Michelle DeBone in for Michelle McCory. In London, number 10 Downing Street has a new resident. Boris Johnson has officially assumed the office of British Prime Minister, replacing Theresa May as Conservative Party leader. Now, it was Johnson who campaigned for the United Kingdom to leave the European Union in 2016. And now he's faced with the difficult task of making it happen by the end of October. i24 News New York Bureau Chief Steve Langford reports Johnson is not your typical stiff upper lip British leader.
Across the ages, character has defined the legendary leaders of the United Kingdom. Churchill, Thatcher, and now Boris? Well, he is a real character. Say what you will, Boris may never bore us as Prime Minister, the 55-year-old former journalist, seeming to come straight out of Monty Python's Flying Circus.
Good afternoon. I have just been to see Her Majesty the Queen, who has invited me to form a government.
Would have loved to be a fly on the wall for that one. Buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride over the next 3 months as the new Prime Minister scrambles to negotiate a deal to withdraw Britain from the European Union. The deadline? Halloween. What else?
Can you get a Brexit deal, Mr. Johnson?
Boris Johnson, the bombastic banner boy for Brexit, claims he will take the UK out of the EU come hell or high water.
Dude, we are going to energize the country. We're going to get Brexit done on October the 31st.
The relationship between the UK and the US has now become even more special as these birds of a feather fly high. President Trump tweeting out congrats, predicting Johnson will be great. The outgoing Prime Minister expressing half-hearted praise for Boris.
I am pleased to hand over to an incoming leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister, who I worked with when he was in my cabinet.
Theresa May had made Boris Johnson her foreign secretary until he quit, protesting May's Brexit policies. Johnson was the colourful mayor of London for 8 years. Before that, a journalist, one who got fired by the Times of London for making up a quote.
I know that there will be people around the place who will question the wisdom of your decision. And there may even be some people here who still wonder quite what they have done.
He's a nice guy. He makes me laugh. But whether or not he's capable of doing the job is another thing we have to wait for and see.
On the streets of London, the papers and the people seem to be under few illusions about this era of bread and circuses.
He's a UK Donald Trump. That says it all.
I can't say my expectations are, but I just hope there's a complete rethink about Brexit.
But Boris Johnson, one of the greatest leaders, I think.
Making Britain great again.
No ifs or buts.
In New York, Steve Langford, i24 News.
A new era for Great Britain. And moving now to Hong Kong, there are new concerns China will use military force to end protests against China's central government authority. Now, weeks of huge and sometimes violent protests were triggered by a proposed law that would allow some accused criminals to be sent to mainland China and be tried in communist courts. Hong Kong tabled the bill but has not officially killed it. And now China's Defense Ministry spokesman is indicating the law allows the People's Liberation Army to be sent to Hong Kong if Hong Kong leaders make that request.
The behavior of some extreme protesters have challenged the authorities of the central government, tested the limits of the one country, two systems principles, which are absolutely intolerable. We will not allow the pearl of the East to be stained. As to your detailed question, there is a clear rule in Item 14 of Chapter 3 of the Hong Kong Garrison Laws.
And to discuss this latest development, we're joined by Claudia Rosette. She's a senior foreign policy fellow at the Independent Women's Forum. Claudia, thank you for joining us. Now, first of all, tell us what's the latest? I mean, have we reached the tipping point, the boiling point in Hong Kong, or do you think that things can still escalate further?
They could escalate further, but something has happened that I think is now driving this. You know, exactly what went into it, I think we don't know the full story, but The demonstrators have incredibly legitimate grievances here. China has been stripping away their rights and promises and freedoms that were promised in Hong Kong way before that 50-year expiration, which is still 28 years off. But on Sunday, some of the demonstrators demonstrated outside China's shadow government office in Hong Kong, the liaison office in Western Hong Kong. And they threw eggs at it, they spray painted the camera, and they they threw paint on the national emblem of China outside it. Now, these are all symbols of what is actually an incredibly brutal tyranny, a dictatorship. It's understandable why they are not happy with what China is doing in Hong Kong. I think that China will not lightly let this pass. Yeah, that's the emblem with, you see the paint splattered on it. And China is going to do something to stop this. Will it be force? Will it be military force? Will it be more police force? Already you're seeing sort of strange things happening, which are very much from the China playbook. Also, as that demonstration was taking place that you're looking at now on the China liaison office, in another part of Hong Kong, thugs with poles were beating people at a subway stop. They were beating some of the protesters who were on their way home. They were beating people who were just on the train. It was a horrible, brutal scene. Now, who were these people? These were not democratic demonstrators at all. That they were attacking some of the demonstrators. So you now have the entry. People are wondering, is this the triads enlisted by someone, by, potentially, we don't know. Okay, so I stress we don't know. But by China, by the administration in Hong Kong, which is actually appointed by China, basically. It's a rigged, they call it elections, it's a rigged system. The chief executive in Hong Kong is chosen and approved by Beijing. The legislature, which the protesters stormed at the beginning of July, is a rubber stamp. It's a hollow legislature, okay? All of this is, so who is now engineering what, I don't know. But we are seeing the setup for China to do something fairly extreme.
Right, and do you think that the garrison law will, in fact, be triggered? Will China send in troops, or is this more of a warning that is trying to scare off protesters? How likely will that be used?
It could be both. It's trying to scare off protesters, clearly. It's trying to say, you better stop it or something really bad could happen. But I wouldn't rule out that China would send in troops. A lot of people are saying, oh, they would never do that. It would be too costly. I think, unfortunately, the lesson that China took from Tiananmen, where it murdered its own people in the streets with its own army 30 years ago, was that the world will exclaim in horror, but then move on and do business, and life will resume for the Communist Party that rules China. So, they would take a huge hit if they did that in Hong Kong. It would be very bad for China's business. Hong Kong is their financial portal to the world. But
and Claudia, would this be unprecedented? Was this the first time that they would be sending in troops?
Into Hong Kong? Well, they have troops garrisoned there, but not to keep order, okay? They're there sort of as a show. They're also there as a threat, frankly. They marched in with the handover in '97, and you can see them right in the middle of Hong Kong's Central Business District. The old British barracks were turned over to China's People's Liberation Army. You can see them when you walk past the gate, but they have not been there to police the street. So it would be unprecedented if China did that, in the sense that it hasn't used its army to control Hong Kong. There's been this increasingly hazy arrangement where Hong Kong is supposed to be mostly taking care of itself. China deals with foreign policy and defense. But would it be unprecedented for China to kill people who live under its sway in order to keep things the way the party wants them? No, there's a lot of horrible precedent for that.
But this would definitely be a first in many senses. Claudia Rosett, thank you so much for joining us and for your insight. Coming up, more bad news for Boeing. The company, already reeling from the grounding of its MAX jets, announces an earnings report for the history books. Welcome back to Clearcut. Going now to Puerto Rico. Will he or won't he? There were several reports embattled Governor Ricardo Rossello's departure from office was imminent, but then earlier today, a tweet from the governor's official residence called those reports, quote, incorrect rumors. Now, the Puerto Rican legislature is said to be ready to start an impeachment process. Correspondent Maggie Ruley has details.
The protests continue in Puerto Rico. Hundreds of thousands are furious at Governor Ricardo Rossello's refusal to resign. The most recent statement from his office confirming the governor is still in Puerto Rico and is in the process of reflection and of listening to the people. The country's anger appears to be reaching a boiling point.
That governor's no good. He should be, get rid of him. Get a good man in there. Okay. Peace for everybody.
Protesters and police continue to be at odds. The protests have grown in size and intensity since a profane group chat between Governor Rosello and his aides was leaked. On the U.S. mainland, chants of "Ricky resign" echo in New York's Grand Central Station. That anger and frustration even reaching the White House. President Trump calling the governor terrible and slamming Rosello for his handling of hurricane disaster funding.
You have incompetent, totally grossly incompetent leadership at the top of Puerto Rico.
All right, we now have a live look at the NASDAQ building here in Times Square. The NASDAQ and the S&P 500 sending new records, the NASDAQ reaching a new all-time high, closing up nearly 0.9%. Investors apparently not worried about a government regulatory investigation into big tech companies. Now, the broader S&P 500 index also posted new record close, advancing almost 0.5%. But disappointing earnings from Boeing and Caterpillar sent the down more than 0.25%. So it was a bad day for Boeing all around. It started with the company's earnings report before the opening. The troubled aerospace giant posted a second quarter loss of $2.9 billion, and that is its worst ever. The costs are said to be piling up for Boeing over the grounding of its 737 MAX jet after two fatal crashes. Boeing shares dropped $5.82 a share in the second quarter, with revenue falling as well to $15.8 billion. The stock plunging more than 3% in today's trading. And shares of Caterpillar closed down close to 4.5% after posting disappointing second quarter earning results. The company missed analysts' revenue and price per share expectations. The heavy machinery manufacturer also lowered its full year earnings guidance, citing lower demand in China and the higher costs due to tariffs. And shares of Facebook advanced over 1% in Wednesday's trading. This despite the announcement of a $5 billion settlement with the Federal Trade Commission for privacy shortfalls. So under the agreement, CEO Mark Zuckerberg will have to submit quarterly compliance reports directly to federal regulators and to Facebook's board of directors. After the bell, Facebook reported better than expected second quarter results. The social media giant beat on earnings and revenue. All right, let's talk business now with David Nelson. He's the chief strategist at Bellpoint. And I just learned that you're also a pilot. So very interesting to talk about Boeing. I mean, okay, let's talk earnings. So Boeing had a record loss in this quarter. How are they going to rebound after this loss, the most in its history?
Well, once this plane can get back in the air, and that's a big if, when that happens. And now it looks like it's pushed out to early next year. I think when we look back at this a year from now and kind of analyze this, we're going to realize that, this is an indictment of the entire process on a lot of levels. It's not just Boeing, it's the FAA, and frankly, the airline industry as well. In these two fatal crashes, one of the pilot in the right seat, the co-pilot, had less than 200 hours. That's almost unheard of in the industry. Clearly not qualified to be in the cockpit at that level. That's going to have to change overseas. But what Boeing's going to have to do now is go back and re-examine why didn't they make this what is known as a clean sheet aircraft, start from scratch. By starting with an existing aircraft already and then kind of stretching it, pushing the engines out a little bit, making bigger engines, you start to change the flight envelope of the airplane, and it becomes very difficult
hence the 2 crashes that we have. And
I mean, I want your take as a pilot. How do you think they'll be able to regain
They'll
the
fix it,
trust
for sure.
of the public?
I'm confident in that, yeah.
You're confident, and you personally would feel comfortable
I would be very
flying
comfortable.
an aircraft.
Once they've gotten to the heart of it, it's largely a software issue. It's in a minor way, it is also a hardware issue. And frankly, if the pilots are willing to fly it, I'm going to get on it. I'm going to get on it as well. I've seen this in the past. They'll work this out, and it'll be good for the company. But the way this has been handled from the start, I think you're going to probably see a couple of resignations within Boeing at some point.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the public would expect that because someone has to take some sort of responsibility.
It's going to take a real long time to get your trust back and other Americans out there to get their trust back and fly in this plane. And now at some point they're going to have to make a decision. Do we cut production and just stop it because the planes are piling up until next year?
Sure. Let's talk about Caterpillar's earnings. Their loss seems to be tied to China's slowing economy. So what do you think its strategy is going forward?
They're going to look to Washington and hope there's a deal. Unfortunately, I think that's going to be tough because I think, the strategy for China, President Xi, has been to push this closer and closer to the election, and they're making a political gamble. They're gambling that Trump is going to lose the election, and they'll have the opportunity to negotiate with somebody on the other side of the aisle. So I think if they're waiting for a trade deal this year, it could be a long wait.
And very quickly about Facebook, shares are up, and this despite the huge settlement with the FTC. So why are investors not concerned about privacy issues, the public?
Well, we're concerned about it. Frankly, the fine, $5 billion, that's quite a small amount for a company this size. They could have added another zero and they could have still covered it. I think, it ties into this whole DOJ investigation. It's not just Facebook, it's Alphabet. I think I question their allegiance. They seem to have no trouble doing business with China, trying to get back into that country, yet they seem to be having a lot of trouble dealing with our own military. So this is going to unfold over the next several months, but unfortunately, the antitrust laws that have been written for these companies that were designed for the likes of Standard Oil, that was more than a century ago.
All right, we'll have to be updated. And quickly, what effect, if any, does Mueller's testimony today, the big story of the day, have on investor sentiment?
I think it's largely a push. I think people saw what they wanted to see. They're going to go in with the same opinion. My concern going in was that this somehow could tilt it closer to the left-hand side of the aisle, where socialist policies seem to be the game of the day. As an investor and someone who risks capital, that's not something that I want to see. It's not good for people's 401k.
All right. David Nelson, thank you so much for weighing in.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
You gave me a lot of hope with Boeing and 737 MAX.
Keep flying.
All right. In Israel, among the soldiers protecting the border, in case of attack, very little is known about one unit in particular that acts in great secrecy, and that is the submarines. i24NEWS was given access to 2 soldiers who recently completed training for the elite unit. Here in our French channel correspondent Matthias Inbar's report, translated into English by i24NEWS' Diana Skaya.
They dreamed about it, and they did it. When we filmed these submariners last February, they were all engaged in the second phase of their training.
It's only at the end of this training they'll receive their assignment and begin their operational duties in the submarines.
We met those who are now officially part of one of the most secret units of the Israeli army, the Shayetet 7.
You can't reveal anything about your daily life, what you do now, say, where you disappear, when you disappear, but you assume that everyone is proud of you at home.
Here are N and L. For security reasons, we cannot reveal their names nor their faces. They have just been assigned their tasks. N is in the sonar department. L is in charge of navigation.
I'm not a GPS, I'm more of a Waze. Yes, I direct the submarine.
What does it mean?
We operate with many navigation systems that give us an indication of where we are in the world.
A sonar is a means for the submarine to map the maritime space, to find one's way in the space. From there, our role is to define what devices surround us, what they are doing around us. This information helps us navigate, plan and find out if we're in secure space or surrounded by enemies.
But before descending into the depths of the ocean, they have to be trained for all possible scenarios. even if these maneuvers don't serve as part of their function. And this is where morale is judged.
We must be able to demonstrate a high level of resistance to deal with very stressful situations. Yes, I am sure we're fighters.
When you are in a submarine, you can't take it anymore. You can't go out. So, before letting you in to maneuver the most expensive machinery of the Israeli army, we want to make sure that you will not crack along the way. When you send this monster underwater with all the abilities it has, you know that your superiority and the advantages you have over those around you.
A superiority that these fighters have difficulty to evoke. The subject is too sensitive, they say. We are not allowed to know the territorial limits of where these submarines operate, but they assure us that it is an indispensable tool for the army in the event of regional conflict. This is one of the reasons why they paid particular attention to the sinking of the Russian nuclear submarine last July.
My first interest was to know what could have happened and how to avoid such problems with our devices. Even if their machines are slightly different from ours, they have a lot of similarities.
Impossible to evoke or show the arming of these behemoths. The subject is taboo, a secret story that began 60 years ago. The first Israeli submarine was launched at sea in 1959.
All right, let's take a look at some headlines from around the globe in our World Wrap. In India, officials now say 86 people were rescued from a fire in Mumbai. The building is home to the state-run telephone company, and at first it was feared dozens had been trapped inside. There are no reports of any injuries. In China, 2 landslides in the southwest have killed at least 14 people. More than 30 others are still missing. The rushing mud washed away 20 homes. The landslides were triggered by a week of heavy rainstorms. More than 800 rescue workers have been sent to the area. In France, officials in Paris fear the soaring temperatures could trigger a collapse at the fire-ravaged Notre Dame Cathedral. It was practically gutted in an April fire. Architects worry the joints will get too dry and will crumble. Temperatures in Paris could reach 107 degrees. And in Florida, SpaceX was forced to delay the launch of the Dragon capsule. And with less than 60 seconds to go, SpaceX decided to scrub the launch, and that was due to weather. The unmanned cargo capsule was supposed to bring supplies to the International Space Station. The backup launch day is tomorrow, July 25th, just after 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And in Wyoming, officials are investigating a terrifying encounter at Yellowstone National Park. A young girl was treated at a hospital after she was charged by a bison. The whole thing caught on video. Correspondent Marcy Gonzalez has the details.
Cell phone video capturing that scare in Yellowstone National Park. A bison running towards a group of tourists Tuesday, charging at a 9-year-old girl, tossing her into the air. Incredibly, she was not seriously hurt.
That little girl is very, very lucky.
The child from Odessa, Florida, was visiting the Old Faithful Geyser area with a group of about 50 people Tuesday. Witnesses say they were within 5 to 10 feet of the bison for at least 20 minutes when it suddenly ran towards them. This isn't the first time a bison has charged at a tourist in the park. Officials using this latest encounter as a reminder to visitors to keep their distance from wild animals.
People don't understand when you go to these wildlife parks that this is wildlife. This is not domestic life.
And that's all the time we have for Clearcut. Stay tuned for Clearcut Plus. Coming up on Clearcut Plus, China puts Hong Kong on notice. It will no longer tolerate the ongoing protests as China tightens its grip on power. Officials say they cannot allow the pearl that is Hong Kong to be stained by violent protests. And former special counsel Robert Mueller testified today twice. We'll have the reaction and a full report. And it's now official. Boris Johnson is Britain's prime minister, but before he ascended the ladder of political power, he once spent part of his summer a long time ago on a kibbutz. We'll have the story.
From the i24NEWS studio in Times Square in New York, this is Clearcut Plus with Michelle McCory.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for watching. I'm Michelle Devone in tonight for Michelle McCory. And we begin with some breaking news. According to the South Korea Joint Chiefs, North Korea has fired what they are calling a projectile, and they say they're monitoring the situation closely, as we are. This is a breaking story. Stay tuned for further developments. And meanwhile, a chill in Hong Kong. China has lost its patience with the ongoing protests there. Beijing now extending its control over the city. The government sending a very clear message. The protests will no longer be tolerated. And the message was delivered by China's defense ministry.
部分激进示威者的行为
The behavior of some extreme protesters have challenged the authorities of the central government, tested the limits of the one country, two systems principles, which are absolutely intolerable. We will not allow the pearl of the East to be stained. As to your detailed question, there is a clear rule in item 14 of chapter 3 of the Hong Kong garrison laws.
All right, joining me now with more on this story is Gordon Chang. He is a China expert. You can read his columns on the Daily Beast, and his latest book is Losing South Korea. Gordon, welcome. Well, let's begin with Hong Kong and what's happening now. How is it affecting that very delicate balance between China and Hong Kong, potentially triggering the garrison law?
Yeah, this is absolutely significant. Basically, Beijing is saying, as you heard the defense spokesman say, it will no longer tolerate protests. Well, people in Hong Kong are absolutely determined to defend their autonomy and free society. And many of the young protesters have said that they will give their lives to defend their homeland. So this is a contest where you can see that last weekend, peace and order certainly deteriorated with the use of the triad-like forces. And so, we can expect a very difficult weekend coming up. And perhaps we could see the Chinese troops coming into the territory.
And do you expect this will happen as soon as this weekend? We will be seeing troops.
Well, it's not necessarily going to happen this weekend, but the People's Armed Police, which is essentially a military-type force controlled by the People's Liberation Army, was seen mustering in Shenzhen, which is just across the border. So there's always the possibility. Remember, the kids are going to test China's limits. And so Beijing could very well decide that this is the weekend. I expect it actually will take 2 or 3 more weeks for this to occur. But whenever it occurs, Michelle, it is going to change politics in Hong Kong forever. Because this is something that Beijing cannot win. People in Hong Kong, and it's not just the student protesters, but people in Hong Kong want to defend their society, and they're going to do that. And it's going to be very hard for China to be able to control Hong Kong in this new environment.
Sure. And what other options do you think Hong Kong has at this point? Because they themselves don't want to see this continuous, very violent protest going on. So other than seeking help from China, what are their options?
Well, they don't, because the police have lost control of the situation on the streets. There's lack of discipline. Clearly, there's a failure of tactics. The police have been doing things that have been encouraging support for the protesters. The kids have used violent tactics, but they have not lost support from the middle class in Hong Kong. And the reason is that most people are focusing in on the government, they're focusing in on China, and the students, even if they don't like what they're doing, nonetheless are not losing, they still have support of people. So this shows that Beijing's in a very difficult position because most people in Hong Kong are starting to look at Beijing in a very different light than they did, for instance, 3 or 4 months ago.
Sure. And Gordon, on another topic, we just reported breaking news about North Korea firing projectiles into the sea. This according to South Korea. What exactly do we know so far, and what does this mean?
Yeah, there were 1 or 2 projectiles, probably solid fuel ballistic missiles. They traveled 270 miles east towards Japan. And it really signifies, of course, that Kim Jong-un, the ruler of North Korea, is unhappy with the progress or lack of it with regard to the denuclearization talks. He wants sanctions relief. He's not getting it from President Trump. And so he's trying to use these missile launches to change the status quo. They tried this in May with little effect. President Trump just sort of brushed it off. I'm sure the North Koreans were upset that they didn't get his attention. They're just trying it again.
All right, I want to get your take on one more topic. i24NEWS has learned that Huawei and other Chinese-manufactured phones have been banned from Israeli military bases. And I guess joining the likes of the United States, where this is already in practice, what does this tell us about the bigger picture, and what do we know about the devices themselves? I mean, do we have evidence that these devices do in fact gather intel?
Well, they certainly can, because they can, of course, they transmit data. And, China has used Huawei equipment to surreptitiously take data. So, for instance, from 2012 to 2017, they were downloading data almost every night from the headquarters of the African Union using Huawei equipment. This is a very positive development that the IDF is no longer going to allow Chinese-made smartphones on their bases. And this is absolutely essential because these devices can potentially be used by Beijing to take data from Israel, from the United States, from any country where these devices are present.
Sure, and it will also be very interesting to see how it affects sales. Gordon Chang, thank you so much for weighing in. Now, last Sunday, a Hezbollah operative was killed in a targeted strike on his vehicle. This happened in Syria, and he was a member of a group gathering intelligence and recruiting inside of Israel. i24NEWS correspondent Daniel Tzemach has the latest on that strike inside of Syria.
Mysterious strikes in Syria's Al-Hara province. Syria State TV is pointing the finger at Israel again. But Israel has no comment on the attack, which was conducted less than 10 miles from its territory.
It certainly fits the pattern of long-standing Israeli preventative operations that are designed to do two things. One is to prevent Iran from producing and smuggling weapons from Syria into Lebanon, and the second is to prevent Iran from building a war machine in Syria itself.
Israel has in the past acknowledged striking Iranian military infrastructure in Syria, weapons depots, arms transfers, even bases. It has also been working to prevent Hezbollah establishing observation posts along Israel's border in areas like Dara and Quneitra. The Israeli military says Iran is trying to gather intelligence on Israel's military activities, both from the border and even from within Israeli territory.
Al-Hara has been and still is a very strategic point, a point that has been used and is being used for intelligence purposes. Hezbollah and the Iranian axis would like to first establish the intelligence points, recruit assets from the local population. This is something that's supposed to enable them to bring additional forces, additional weapons, and eventually create a Hezbollah-type, Lebanese-type strategy here with even heavier weapons, something that Israel seeks to prevent.
This coming before Israel's ambassador to the UN showed what he says is Iran's weapon smuggling route for its proxy Hezbollah. One of the main sites, the port of Beirut. He dubbed it the port of Hezbollah. At the beginning of the month, Israel was linked to strikes near Damascus that led to 15 military casualties, prompting Syria to bring the issue to the United Nations. Israel has been active in preventing Iranian military entrenchment in Syria, but more recent incidents on the northern frontier show that the threat may be inching ever closer to Israel's doorstep. Daniel Tzemach, i24NEWS.
And coming up on Clearcut Plus, it was finally Mueller time on Capitol Hill. The former special prosecutor appeared in front of two committees for hours of combined testimony. We'll tell you what he had to say. And we'll have a story of an athlete who has earned $100 million in his playing career, yet he's deeply in debt. A look at money and professional athletes coming up on Clearcut Plus. You're watching Clearcut Plus. Welcome back. I'm Michelle Devone in tonight for Michelle McCory. And the really big show today in Washington, D.C. was held in Congress in two acts. Former special counsel Robert Mueller testified today. Act 1 was before the House Judiciary Committee this morning. After a brief intermission, Act 2 was before the House Intelligence Committee. It was a long day for Mueller. Reactions to the testimony were predictable. Republicans pointed out that there was nothing new in the testimony.
Director Mueller, a lot of the time said, well, it's in the document, read my report, it's in the four corners of there. So, I mean, I really think today had a lot to do with politics.
Our senior national correspondent Michael Schur was there for it all. Mueller has presumably gone home by now, but not Michael. He's here with the story. So, Michael, did we in fact learn nothing new today?
Yeah, that's right, Michelle. I got here before Mueller, and I'm still here for some reason. No, we did learn something today, and Steve Chabot's not wrong either, the Ohio Republican who's on the Judiciary Committee and has been here for other impeachments. He was there for the impeachment of Bill Clinton as well, and I talked to him about that a little bit. So there was something learned today, and what was learned today was that the Democrats were able to get something out of Mueller, not everything that people expected, maybe not even everything that Democrats wanted in their dream scenario. But what they were able to hear him say was that this report did not exonerate the president. They were able to do that in the first few moments of the hearing, and that is the most important thing they wanted to communicate to Americans who haven't taken the time or tuned in enough to watch this report or to read this report and to watch the coverage of the report. Before this, going into this conversation, the president really led the narrative on the report. So too did Attorney General Bill Barr. Now, at least the Democrats have co-opted some of it, and that's what they wanted. And it seemed that they got what they wanted, if not in a perfect way. Michelle?
Sure. And President Trump has been very vocal about the hearings, and the representatives seem to be more muted in their reactions. What are you hearing on the Hill?
Yeah, just about everybody, and it's not surprising, everyone I have spoken to on this issue today has stuck with their party, right? I mean, I haven't heard any Republicans saying, wow, this was a blockbuster. I've changed my opinion about the president and what happened. I haven't heard any Democrats say that they backed away from it. As a matter of fact, Lori Trahan, the Massachusetts Democrat, had not been for impeachment. This afternoon, she put out a statement saying after today's testimony, she is now asking for an impeachment inquiry. So it did change perhaps a mind or two on the Democratic side. That's what they wanted to do. Chabot, who we just heard from, said this is a lot about politics. Well, these are exactly what happens, and this is exactly what happens, and these are politicians, exactly what happens in these sorts of hearings in today's political world. And if you're able to win people over onto your side in some way, then maybe it's good politics. It remains to be seen, though, if the House leadership, the Democratic leadership, Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, when I spoke to him earlier today, he said he hadn't even watched the Mueller testimony. Remains to be seen if their minds are changed, though. Michelle?
Absolutely. It'll be very interesting to see. It was also a very long day for the special counsel, and a lot of criticism actually about his performance, not about what he said, but how he said it and maybe how tired he looked. Was this classic Mueller appearance? What did you think about how he testified?
It's the first time he's ever appeared as a 74-year-old man. You give him a little bit of slack, I think. It is the 89th time he's been in front of a House or a Senate hearing. I think that, most of the focus of, listen, there are a lot of people who said what they said about him. I'm really sort of here to analyze and talk about what the substance of what he said was and how he delivered it. Listen, I think that Mueller knew that he had an admonition from the Justice Department to stick within the parameters of the report. He has said himself that he will let the report speak for himself. It was a very difficult thing for someone to go up in front of a House hearing. Perhaps he did want to say more. Perhaps he wanted to say less. Perhaps, clearly, he didn't want to be there in the first place. Very difficult, though, to go before all those lights and all those questions with this kind of pressure and come out of it any other way than sort of beleaguered after all of this. So to Robert Mueller and how he looked and sounded, I don't know. But I do think that the message was pretty succinct, that he was not going farther than where he had already gone with this information, Michelle.
Sure, and as you mentioned, he didn't want to be there in the first place. Michael Schur, thank you so much for your insight.
Thanks.
And staying with the issue of politics, but in a slightly lighter vein, today Boris Johnson became the 77th Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. But in Israel, there are some who remember him well before his political career. They remember his short stint volunteering on no other than a kibbutz. The results were, well, not so successful. i24 News' Alec Pollard has that story.
Alec Collins follows the news from the UK very closely from his home in Kibbutz Kfar HaNasi in northern Israel.
In 1984, he came here with his sister as a volunteer. Our kibbutz has a rule that every volunteer should have adopted parents. So I acted as a parent to Boris and his sister.
In July 1984, while on vacation from studies, the man now charged with navigating the UK out of stormy Brexit waters decided to volunteer on a kibbutz in northern Israel.
When I went to a kibbutz, I don't think I contributed much to the Israeli economy. The Israeli economy has changed radically.
Boris and his sister were hosted by Alec and his wife, who didn't exactly assume they were living with a promising future politician.
If he told me then that he would become Prime Minister, I don't think I would have believed it.
The young Johnson was assigned to the kitchens and then to the laundry room, but in the end he barely lasted 2 weeks before moving on to tour the country.
Physical labor wasn't exactly his best trait.
Johnson himself, from an interview 4 years ago, has only good memories from the experience.
I worked on a kibbutz. I wouldn't say I added much value.
All that is far in the past, as Johnson enters 10 Downing Street. Before dealing with Brexit and other global issues, the old friends from the kibbutz have a request from the new Prime Minister.
If someone with money could buy this team, it would be great.
Leeds.
All right, and we're switching gears now entirely to a totally different kind of story, but shocking in itself. Actually, we'll let you decide. NFL running back Adrian Peterson is broke. And what makes the story so incredible is that Peterson has made $100 million during his NFL career. Now, according to sports blog The Athletic, Peterson is millions of dollars in debt. His lawyer says his current financial situation is the result of an athlete trusting the wrong people and being taken advantage of by those he trusted. Joining me now is a man who knows all too well this story. It is sadly not just the story of Adrian Peterson, but a story that impacts the lives and fortunes of many professional athletes. Ed Butowski, who often appears here as a business and markets expert and has made a career out of working with professional athletes to help them manage and keep their money. Ed,
right.
To me, this is a shocking story. I mean, to lose $100 million so soon, but this is something that is actually, I understand, quite common in the athletic world when people become famous overnight. Well, enlighten us.
Yeah, I mean, I have made a career around this, and I will tell you, generally speaking, most athletes are some of the nicest, friendliest people I've ever met. They're my favorite people to be around, even more so than serial entrepreneurs. One of the issues, a lot of these athletes feel as though they want to let other people take care of their money and they don't want to learn. And it's very simple. And what has happened to Adrian is the same thing that's happened to a lot of people. And I actually did a movie called Broke on ESPN, 30 for 30, that I appear in about 30 times, but I actually put it together. And I put it together with the idea of trying to communicate what people are doing wrong so they'll correct it. And it's real simple. They put about 90 to 95%, this is people who go broke, in illiquid investments, meaning anything like real estate, private equity, venture capital, and then they also overspend. Nobody's ever gone broke by putting their money into public securities and then watch their spending. All right? They don't go broke because of that. They go broke because they put money in illiquid investments. Adrian Peterson is a really nice person. He made $100 million, but he took home probably close to about $45 million, which is still a tremendous amount of money, but then spent money and never really understood, that it was going to end at some point, okay? And meaning the amount of money that he was going to make. He's a great guy, and I feel terrible, and I'm actually going to find a way to reach out and see if I can help him.
So the fact that we're seeing this as more of a phenomena, how are we seeing the sports world, the NFL, dealing with this? Are they trying maybe to better educate the incoming athletes?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question because I actually know a lot about what each one of these leagues is doing. The NFL does the worst job of educating their athletes. They set up these programs at schools like Harvard and Wharton and Columbia and send the young men to these schools to learn about becoming entrepreneurs. Now, that's fine, but that's not managing money. The programs the NFL has, I wish that they would change all of them and just get back to the basic education and real simple stuff. The NBA does the best job. And Major League Baseball needs to improve what they're doing. A lot of that problem they have, quite honestly, has to do with a lot of the language gap, because a lot of players don't speak English in Major League Baseball. But they're getting better. They're all getting better. The NFL does a terrible job. So a lot of these athletes also who play in the NFL, they have the shortest careers. So they spend money, they do a lot with their money really early on, hoping they're going to get another contract. And Michelle, they just don't get that next contract.
And not thinking about retirement either, which is something they have to think about at a very, very early age. Well, I want to thank you at this point. Thanks so much. And I'm sure you would appreciate it if you reached out. And let's take a look at some of the headlines from the U.S. as we cut across America. In Florida, it came close, but weather forced the cancellation of today's planned launch of SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket only moments before it was set to lift off. The rocket is carrying supplies and materials for the International Space Station. A backup launch? Well, it's available tomorrow. If the launch does not get off the ground then, well, NASA and SpaceX might have to wait up to a week for the next chance to send up the Dragon cargo ship. In Pennsylvania, the CEO of Philadelphia-based coffee company La Colombe Coffee has offered to pay the outstanding lunch debts of a school district in the northwestern part of the state. The school district sent out lunch bills to kids who are in areas, warning they could end up in foster care unless they paid. Now, the school declined the offer of $22,000. They declined to wipe out those bills, saying the money is owned by parents who can afford to pay. In Ohio, the hospital which treated Neil Armstrong for heart disease will pay the family of the former astronaut $6 million. The Mercy Health Fairfield Hospital agreeing that Armstrong's death in 2012 might have been avoidable, and the procedures performed on him may have led to his death. News of the settlement comes less than a week after we celebrated the 50th anniversary of Armstrong becoming the first astronaut to walk on the moon. And in Colorado, this bear thought it might get a nice dumpster meal, but he met his match in this bear-resistant dumpster, Colorado Parks and Wildlife's Northeast region, which shared the video of the attempted snack heist, which happened late at night 1 week ago. The dumpster belongs to a marijuana dispensary. The bear didn't get his munchies, but he did rip the gate off, no doubt in frustration. And what better way to end our cut across America and the show tonight than with the announcement the Oscar Mayer Weiner Mobile is up for rent on Airbnb. Yes, that's right. You can spend the night inside a giant wiener. Well, the dog sleeps two guests and only allowed to book a single night inside. That looks like a very, very interesting experience. And that's Clearcut. We'd love to hear from you. Have a great night.